Dr. Renee McPherson, co-director of the South Central Climate Science Center and associate professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Sustainability at the University of Oklahoma. Today, I will be talking to you about the economics of some of the major energy policy options for managing climate change that we as a society have available to us today. Energy policy addresses how governments, corporations, organizations, or individuals produce, distribute, or consume energy. For example, it includes international treaties that limit where oil can be drilled in offshore deposits, domestic legislation to reduce fossil fuel emissions, and state incentives to purchase energy-saving devices for your home, as well as much more. In this video, I'll focus on energy policies that result from the fact that the burning of fossil fuels is a major contributor to climate change. Overall, there are two response strategies for addressing climate change: mitigation and adaptation. Mitigation is the process of reducing the intensity or the source of something that is undesirable. For example, reservoir managers may reduce the intensity of a downstream flood by opening floodgates before a major rainfall event occurs and releasing the water more slowly over a longer period of time. In the case of climate change, we are trying to lessen the amount of greenhouse gas concentrations so that the changes in our climate are not as drastic. In the second case, adaptation is the process of managing the risk of or vulnerability to something that is undesirable. For example, you may adapt to living in a tornado-prone area by building your house out of stone instead of wood. Climate change adaptation focuses on coping with anticipated changes in Earth's climate by improving resilience or minimizing the adverse impacts. I'm going to discuss our policy choices for mitigation, while other videos in this course will cover adaptation strategies in further detail. To reduce or stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations, we can either curtail the sources of these gases or enhance the sinks that remove the gases from the atmosphere. Examples of policies that would curtail the sources include requiring higher fuel efficiency standards for vehicles, creating an incentive for customers to switch to solar and wind energy for electricity, and creating construction standards that promote the use of green building techniques to reduce heating and cooling needs. In contrast, policies that enhance the sinks include REDD+, which is an international effort to reduce emissions from deforestation and forest degradation, creating an incentive to develop carbon capture technologies, or promoting best management practices in the agricultural community to enhance rangelands for carbon sequestration. Economists and policymakers have worked together to propose various ways to encourage individuals, townships, and even corporations to adopt these behaviors. Two methods that you may have heard of in the news are the carbon tax and cap and trade. Both of these methods try to correct an existing market failure by incorporating the additional damages that greenhouse gas emissions cause to society. Typically, the sales price of a commodity must be greater than the sum of all of the production costs borne by the seller. A carbon tax is a pollution tax levied on emitters of greenhouse gases based on the carbon content of their commodity. It essentially places a price on carbon pollution, forcing all of us to face the social cost of emissions. But the success of the program is highly dependent on how the taxation rate is set. If the tax is too low, then emitters have little reason to change their actions. And if the tax is too high, then it can prematurely shut down carbon-intensive markets. Getting the taxation rate just right is the only way to successfully reduce emissions of greenhouse gases. Cap and trade works by creating a limit or a cap on the total amount of greenhouse gases allowed to be emitted by producers of emissions and allocating a set number of allowances or permits to each producer. For example, if the U.S. wanted to reduce its total annual emissions from 5 billion metric tons to 4 billion metric tons, it could allocate 4 billion one-ton allowances across the market segments that produce emissions. A carbon market is then created for these allowances, where producers who over-emit can buy additional allowances from the producers who are able to make significant reductions in their emissions. Cap and trade can provide a controlled pathway for reducing greenhouse gas emissions because the cap can slowly be decreased over time. As with the carbon tax, careful thought must be put into selecting the overall cap and the number of allowances to be issued to each producer so as to incentivize emissions reductions. Cap and trade programs also may include the option for carbon emitters to invest in offsets, which allow them to invest in ways to reduce carbon elsewhere in the world, typically in less developed countries at reduced costs. Critics of cap and trade are quick to point out that regulating offsets can be tricky, as some countries have been found to develop carbon sources solely so that they can destroy them by selling offsets overseas. In addition, for offsets that promote planting a grove of trees, it is unclear how permanent that carbon sink will be, especially if government leaders change drastically. An important question that supporters of either a carbon tax or cap and trade system must answer is how should the revenue generated from these policies be used? Proposals suggest that revenue should be used to reduce other tax rates, provide Social Security benefits, or purchase energy-saving technologies at government buildings, just to name a few ideas. Regardless of whether you support a carbon tax or cap and trade, greenhouse gases are well mixed in the atmosphere, and thus global actions must be taken to make significant strides in reducing concentration levels. High emissions from one nation can easily outstrip reductions in emissions from others. Determining the policy option that results in the greatest benefit for all can be a complicated endeavor. But groups like the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change are continuing to negotiate toward a worldwide goal. However, waiting for agreement from 200 nations before taking any action is not an adequate solution. The United States still needs to demonstrate leadership and create appropriate energy policies before there is irreparable damage to our Earth.